She spent half a decade telling everyone she was going to buy an apartment. I spent that same time saving in silence. When I actually bought it, she said I owed her half for having the idea first. I want to be honest about something before I start. I don't hate my sister. I've never hated my sister. What I feel is harder to name, something closer to grief, maybe, or the particular exhaustion that comes from watching someone you love run in circles for years and then blame you for the running. This is a story about an apartment, but it's also a story about two different relationships with the concept of doing something. My sister is 31. I'm 28. We grew up in the same house, heard the same advice from the same parents, sat at the same Sunday dinners where our father talked about property, savings, the compounding logic of owning versus renting. We both nodded. We both agreed. We were both smart enough to understand the argument. Then we went and lived completely different versions of what we understood. She talked. I saved. And when I finally bought the apartment 6 months ago, the one I'd been quietly working toward for 6 years, she looked at me across a bar table and told me I had stolen her dream. Let me describe my sister's vision, because it was genuinely impressive in its detail. For at least 5 years, probably closer to 6, if I'm honest, she had been building what I can only call a theoretical real estate empire constructed entirely from conversation. She identified the neighborhood. Not our neighborhood in some vague sense, specifically this neighborhood, this pocket of the city where we grew up, where the streets are wide and tree-lined and the prices haven't fully caught up to the adjacent zip codes yet. She spotted it before a lot of people did. She would point out buildings on walks and say things like, "That one, that's the kind of property that appreciates." She wasn't wrong. Her eye was good. Her analysis, delivered at family dinners and over coffee and in texts that arrived unprompted at odd hours, was often sharp. She had spreadsheets, or she talked about spreadsheets. She calculated down payment requirements. She compared interest rates. She researched buildings' HOA fees, neighborhood walkability scores, school district ratings even though neither of us had children. She consumed real estate content, podcasts, YouTube videos, subreddits. She knew terminology that I had to look up later. Cap rates. Price-to-rent ratios. Assessed versus market value. When people at parties asked about buying property, they often ended up in long conversations with my sister, who had so much information to offer. What she didn't have, what she never had, not once, not in any of those 5 or 6 years, was a dedicated savings account with money in it specifically for a down payment. I know this because she told me, in a different context, a different conversation, when she was being generous and self-aware. I know I should be saving more. I'm working on it, she said this regularly. She said it the year she bought a new car, financing it, of course, because she traded in her previous car and still owed more than it was worth. She said it the year she took 2 vacations, one to a beach in the south and one, improbably, to Lisbon. She said it when she moved from her shared apartment into a nicer solo place because she was done with roommates. She said it as punctuation to conversations that were otherwise about restaurants she'd tried and concerts she'd attended and gadgets she'd bought. She wasn't a bad person. She wasn't irresponsible in the way people sometimes use that word as a synonym for reckless or careless. She was responsible about her payments, always paid on time, good credit score, never missed a bill. She just organized her money around present comfort. And the future she described so vividly at dinner stayed exactly where descriptions live, in the future. Meanwhile, I was making different choices. I started saving seriously at 22, right out of college. Not because I was more virtuous than my sister, or better at abstract reasoning. We had the same upbringing, the same models, the same advice. I started because something about hearing my father talk about property value and security made it feel urgent to me in a way it apparently didn't to my sister. Like a door that might close. The first years were $500 a month, set aside the day my paycheck hit, moved to a separate account I made deliberately inconvenient to access. No debit card attached. Transfers took 2 business days. I wanted friction between my impulses and my savings. I lived with roommates until I was 26, 3 years longer than my sister lasted. 3 years of compromised privacy and occasional passive aggression about dishwashing and thermostat settings. I drove a car I bought for $3,200 cash from a coworker's neighbor, a reliable enough sedan with a check engine light that turned out to be a faulty sensor, which I got diagnosed and then ignored for 4 years because the car ran fine. My sister would have been embarrassed by that car. I wasn't proud of it exactly, but I understood what it was funding. I said no to things, not dramatically, not self-righteously, just quietly and consistently. I didn't do the group trips to Nashville or the beach houses rented by 12 people for long weekends. I packed lunch when my coworkers went to the food hall near our office that charged $17 for a bowl of grains and protein. I found a salon that charged $30 instead of the $90 place everyone else liked. I know how these choices sound, and I know they sound like sacrifice because they were. But they were choices, not circumstances. My salary wasn't dramatically different from my sister's. Our lives were differently organized. By the time I was 27, I was putting away $900 a month, plus accumulated interest on 6 years of saving, plus a chunk from a work bonus I declined to spend on a trip I was invited on and instead moved quietly into the account. I had enough. The apartment cost $143,000 in our neighborhood, the neighborhood my sister had been identifying and analyzing and discussing for years. Small, second floor, good light, original hardwood floors under some carpet I planned to rip up. Solid building with a healthy reserve fund. My offer was accepted on the third day of listing. I went through underwriting. I signed papers. I got keys. I told the family at Sunday dinner. My parents were proud, the particular pride of people who gave advice that was actually taken, which doesn't happen as often as advice givers hope. Aunts and uncles asked questions about the building, the process, how I'd managed. My sister sat through most of it quietly, mentioned she had a headache, and left about 40 minutes earlier than usual. I should have understood then what was coming. I didn't. 2 weeks later, my sister texted me, "Can we meet up? Want to talk about something?" Her choice of venue, a bar rather than a coffee shop or one of our parents' houses, told me this was a conversation she decided to lubricate. I drove over and found her already there with a drink in front of her. She looked uncomfortable in the specific way of someone who has been rehearsing something and is now confronting the actual performance of it. "I've been thinking about your apartment," she said. "And honestly, I'm hurt. That was my plan, my idea. I've been talking about buying in that neighborhood for 5 years. You knew that. And you just took it, went behind my back and stole my dream." I remember the exact physical sensation of hearing that. Not anger, not yet. Something more like vertigo. A brief suspicion that I had misheard. "You feel like I stole your dream," I repeated carefully, "by buying an apartment. Not just any apartment. That neighborhood. I identified that neighborhood. I've been analyzing it for years. I was planning to buy this year. You knew all of this, and you just moved. You took what I was building toward." I tried several angles of response, and she had answers for all of them. When I pointed out that she could still buy an apartment, she said the timing was wrong now because I'd beaten her to it, as if our family could only produce one apartment owner and I'd claimed the slot. When I said I'd grown up in the neighborhood too and didn't need her authorization to buy there, she introduced her theory of intellectual contribution, the idea that her years of market research constituted groundwork I had benefited from, that her dinner table analysis had shaped my understanding, that she had, in some meaningful sense, done the thinking, and I had merely executed it with money. "The courts call it misappropriation of ideas," she said at one point, with genuine conviction. I looked at her across the table. My older sister, someone I'd grown up admiring in certain ways, someone whose confidence I'd often envied, and I tried to be charitable. I tried to understand the psychology of what she was saying rather than just the content. And what I saw, I think, was someone in genuine pain who had chosen the wrong explanation for it. She wasn't lying to hurt me. She believed it. She had told herself the story of her real estate vision for so many years that it had become, in her internal accounting, something she owned, something that had value, something I had taken. The fact that it existed only in conversation, that no dollar had ever moved in its direction, didn't register in the ledger she was keeping. Intent and action occupied the same column in her accounting. She had planned. Therefore, she had done. Therefore, I had taken something. "You're saying I owe you half my apartment," I said, "because you talked about buying one first. I'm saying you benefited from my vision, my research. I did the intellectual work. You had the cash together. In a way, we produced this outcome, and I'm entitled to recognition for my contribution." She took her case to the family. My mother, to her credit, tried to be diplomatic. She suggested that I might acknowledge my sister's influence as a gesture of goodwill. "Your sister does feel hurt. Maybe if you just..." "She didn't influence me," I said. "I grew up in that neighborhood too. We heard the same advice from the same father. I started saving 6 years ago. She knows that. She's watched me skip things she invited me to because I was saving. I didn't learn the value of that neighborhood from her dinner table analysis. I learned it from living there. My father was more direct. He called my sister's grievance what it was: a pattern. Your sister has been planning things her whole life, he told me, not unkindly, because he loves her. She planned to get fit. Still planning. She planned to get a different certification for work. Still planning. She planned to learn a language. Still planning. The apartment was another plan. You can't claim the outcome of a plan you never executed. That's not how anything works. I arranged a second meeting with my sister because I wanted to understand something specific. If the positions were reversed, I said, if you'd saved, you'd sacrificed, you'd done what I did, and you'd bought the apartment, would you have given me half because I'd also mentioned wanting to buy in that neighborhood? She hesitated. Genuinely hesitated. And in that hesitation was the entire truth of what she actually believed. That's different, she said finally. I had the original vision. So the sharing principle only applies when you didn't do the work but want the outcome. She didn't have an answer for that. She retreated to emotion instead, said that I was being cold, clinical, that family wasn't supposed to be transactional, that she'd expected more from me. I understood what was happening. The logical argument had collapsed. So she was moving to the moral one. The logic said her claim was groundless. So logic had to go. I laid out the numbers for her, not to humiliate her, genuinely, because I thought they might clarify something. I saved $900 a month for 6 years. Her car payment was $600 a month, every month, for 4 years, and before this car, another car with similar payments. Her rent for her solo apartment was $1,400 a month versus the $700 I paid for my share of a house with roommates. Her vacations cost her roughly $3,000 to $5,000 a year. I'm not saying you were wrong to take vacations, I told her. I'm saying those were choices. Mine were too. You chose present comfort. I chose future security. Those aren't randomly distributed outcomes. They're the direct results of different priorities. The apartment is my priority materialized. Your rental and your car and your trips are your priorities materialized. We both got what we chose. So I'm supposed to have lived miserably, she said. I'm not saying that either. I didn't live miserably. I lived differently. You enjoyed your 20s in ways I didn't. I'm enjoying my apartment in ways you're not. We both got what we prioritized. I just don't understand why my priorities should be split with you when yours weren't split with me. She delivered her ultimatum at the end of that conversation: acknowledge her contribution, put her on the deed, give her 25%, something formal, or she was done with me. I'd be the sister who built her success on stolen vision. Who couldn't have succeeded without someone else's groundwork but pretended she did it alone. I took a breath. I didn't steal your vision, I said. We had the same dream. You chose to keep it a dream. I chose to do the work to make it real. Those aren't equivalent choices. My apartment is the outcome of my choices, not yours. Keep the talk. I'll keep the apartment. She followed through. Stopped speaking to me. Went to extended family with her version, which had a kind of internal coherence if you accepted its premises. And some family members, wanting to remain neutral, treated it as genuinely controversial. I became a figure of mild family drama, the sister who was maybe too hard, maybe too selfish, maybe should have found some way to honor what her sister had envisioned. Update 1. The following months were strange. I painted walls in my apartment. I ripped up the carpet and found the hardwood underneath, better than I'd hoped, just needing some sanding and refinishing. I built furniture from flat packs, learned things about power tools, started to understand the particular satisfaction of a space that is entirely and irreversibly yours. I heard about my sister through family, still renting. She'd actually moved to a slightly more expensive apartment, which surprised no one. Still with car payments, still planning to buy, according to our mother, who gave me these updates with a kind of careful neutrality that suggested she didn't know what to do with the situation either. Still analyzing the market, still with the spreadsheets. Apparently, though, now the spreadsheets tracked a neighborhood 2 miles from mine, because my father told me, with a slightly pained expression, my sister felt like my neighborhood was compromised for her. The vision had moved. The talk continued. The savings did not begin. Family gatherings, when we both attended, were exactly as awkward as you'd expect. We navigated them with the practiced avoidance of people who have decided not to have the fight in public. We spoke when addressed. We were civil. We were not sisters. I kept building the apartment into a home. I hung things on walls. I learned which light was best at which time of day and arranged furniture accordingly. I found a farmer's market 3 blocks away that became a Saturday ritual. Small things. The texture of actual inhabitation. The apartment wasn't just an investment. It was a place. My place. Update 2. About 4 months into the arrangement, one of my uncles, my father's brother, someone with a long history of plain speaking, called me unprompted. "I heard your sister's version of things," he said. "And I've been thinking about it." I waited. "Did she ever loan you money for this apartment?" "No." "Did she do research you couldn't have done yourself?" "No." "Did she sacrifice anything for you to be able to buy it?" "No." "So what exactly did she contribute?" According to her, she talked about wanting to buy an apartment in that neighborhood before I did. She believes that talking about something creates a kind of ownership over it. Silence on the line. Then, "I've known your sister her whole life. She's been talking about things since she was 12 years old. She talked about being an engineer. About learning guitar. About building a business. About getting into shape. About traveling for a year. She's a wonderful talker." A pause. "You did the right thing. You saved your money and you bought a home. Nobody gets half of someone else's home for having conversations." It helped more than I expected. Not because I needed external validation of something I already knew was right, but because the loneliness of being cast as the story's villain has a weight to it, and someone who'd watched both of us from the outside, naming the situation clearly, was a kind of ballast. The broader family, I understood, had quietly sorted itself. Most people, when pressed to actually examine the logic, couldn't sustain the position that talking about buying a property entitles you to half of someone else's. 2 aunts reached out separately, both with some version of, "I don't want to get in the middle of it, but we're proud of you." Update 3. 8 months into the arrangement, my sister reached out. The text was brief and somewhat formal, like something she'd drafted several times. "Hey. I know things have been weird. I don't want it to stay that way. Would you want to get coffee sometime?" I thought about it for 2 days. Not because I was considering refusing. I miss my sister. I miss the relationship. I'm not made of stone. But because I needed to be clear with myself about what I was and wasn't walking into. I wasn't going to get an apology that looked like what I'd want an apology to look like. What I might get, at best, was movement, some acknowledgement that reality had shifted her story, even if only slightly. We met at a coffee shop. Neutral ground. No alcohol, morning light. She looked tired, I thought. Or maybe just older. She'd turned 31 while we weren't speaking, and I'd sent a birthday text that she'd responded to minimally. We talked around the subject for a while: family, work, small news from our respective lives. Then she said, in the particular tone of someone getting something out before they lose the nerve, "I think I was jealous. If I'm being honest, you did something I kept telling myself I was going to do. And instead of being happy for you, I made it about me. It was easier to say you stole my idea than to admit that I never really tried." She didn't say I was wrong to call it theft. She didn't say she was sorry. But she said the true thing, the thing underneath all the rationalizations, the one that had been sitting there the whole time, waiting for her to get close enough to it to name it. She was jealous. She hadn't tried. She turned her failure to act into a grievance against my success at acting, because that was less painful than the truth. I accepted this without making a production of it. "I know," I said. "Because I did." "I still think you could have," she trailed off. Couldn't actually finish the sentence in the light of morning, without a grievance to sustain it. Could have what? I don't know. Something. There was nothing to do, I said, not unkindly. "I bought an apartment with my savings. You're my sister and I love you, but there's no version of that situation where I owe you part of something I worked for and you didn't. That's not what family means." She nodded slowly. Not full agreement. Not the clean acknowledgement I might have wanted. But something. Update 4. A year has passed since I bought the place. 7 months since my sister and I resumed something resembling our normal relationship. Not fully repaired. Not the easy warmth of before the conflict, but functional. Honest, even, in a new way. As if the collision had removed a layer of polite fictions we'd both been maintaining about how similar we were, how equivalently we were moving through life. She visited the apartment recently. First time. She'd refused to come before, during the arrangement, refused the implicit acknowledgement that the apartment existed and was mine. Coming now was its own kind of concession. I watched her walk through the rooms. She saw the hardwood I'd refinished, the walls I'd painted a color I'd agonized over for 3 weeks, the shelves I'd built in the living room from a design I'd sketched myself and modified twice during construction. She stood in the kitchen for a moment and looked out the window at the street below, the neighborhood she'd analyzed, identified, discussed for years. "It's nice," she said finally. "You did good." Not, "I'm sorry I said you stole something you built." Not, "I was wrong." Just the acknowledgement. Simple, flat, and probably as close as she could get. I decided it was enough. Not because I don't think the fuller accounting is warranted, I do. But because I've learned something about what you can and can't extract from another person's self-understanding, and how much energy it costs to keep wanting something they can't give you. She looked at my apartment and said, "You did good." And somewhere inside that is the ghost of what she couldn't quite say. I can live with a ghost. We had a beer and talked about other things. She mentioned she was thinking about looking more seriously at saving for a place. I didn't say anything about that. Just listened. "Here's what I've settled into, a year on." She talked about buying an apartment for 5 years. Analyzed the market, identified buildings, made spreadsheets, or talked about making spreadsheets. Never saved a single dedicated dollar. Then when I actually bought one, she claimed I stole her idea. As if talking about something creates ownership of it. As if the mouth has property rights the hands don't earn. I saved $900 a month while she spent $600 a month on car payments I couldn't afford. I lived with roommates while she had her own nice apartment. I drove a beater I was mildly embarrassed by while she upgraded every 3 years. I packed lunches while she ate out. I stayed home while she took vacations I was invited on and declined. Then she wanted half my apartment because she'd had the idea first. The idea cost nothing. The apartment cost $143,000. She contributed $0. She said I benefited from her research. Her research was talking at dinner about neighborhood price trends and pointing at buildings. That's not intellectual property. That's conversation. You can't copyright an observation about a neighborhood that both of us grew up in. I didn't need her permission to buy there. I needed $40,000 for a down payment, which I saved while she spent. When I asked if she'd have shared with me if our positions were reversed, if she'd done the saving and sacrifice, and I'd only talked, she hesitated. Of course she would have said she earned it herself. The sharing principle only travels in one direction, toward the person who didn't do the work. Ideas without action are entertainment, not achievement. Everyone has ideas. The woman at the bar has ideas. The person in the meeting has ideas. The ideas are free and plentiful and they don't build anything. What builds things is the sustained, unglamorous, often boring work of choosing differently, repeatedly, over time. She dreamed for 5 years. I saved for 6. Only one of us has an apartment. She finally said she was jealous. Said it was easier to call it theft than to admit she never really tried. That's the closest she's ever come to the true thing. She didn't lose the apartment to me. She lost it to herself. 1 dinner out and 1 car payment and 1 vacation at a time. 1,000 small choices that added up to a life she enjoyed and a dream that stayed theoretical. We had the same goal, the same neighborhood, the same parents telling us the same things about security and property and saving. Different choices. She chose present comfort. I chose future security. Those aren't equally valid paths to the same destination. They're paths to entirely different destinations. She arrived at more talk. I arrived at an apartment. I think about my sister with tenderness more than bitterness now, which surprised me. I expected it to work the other way as time passed. But what I see when I look at her is someone genuinely confused about the relationship between vision and outcome. Someone who built a rich inner life around plans she never launched, and then experienced my success as a kind of robbery rather than a different story entirely. That's a painful way to move through the world. Her talk wasn't cynical. She believed in it. The plans were real to her. The intentions were genuine. She just never understood that intention and action occupy different spaces and produce different results. I'm hanging a shelf I designed myself when she texts me. A picture of the old neighborhood, taken from a street I know, 3 buildings down from the one I grew up in. Walking around, she writes. Miss it sometimes. Then, a minute later, you lucked out finding that apartment when you did. Markets moved since. I look at the text for a while. Luck. That's the word she's landed on. The one that lets the story make sense without requiring her to revise it too much. I got lucky with the timing. The money was just there. I put the phone down and go back to the shelf. My sister talked about buying an apartment for 5 years. I bought one. She called it theft, claimed I stole her idea because her mouth moved before my money did. But ideas don't build walls. Savings do. Sacrifice does. Action does. She analyzed the market while I packed lunches. She identified buildings while I drove a beater. She calculated down payments while I deposited them. We both had the dream. I made it real. She made it conversation. Now she says I got lucky. That's fine. I'll take luck. Luck that started at 22 with $500 a month in a hard-to-access account. Luck that looked like roommates for 3 years longer than I wanted. Luck that looked like a $3,200 car with a check engine light I learned to ignore. Luck that looked like Sunday dinners I left early to avoid spending money I was saving. You can't patent a common dream. You can't copyright a conversation. You can only do the work or not do the work. I did it. She didn't. The apartment is mine. Not because I stole her idea, but because I executed my own. Same dream. Different paths. And all the difference in the world between the person who talked about it and the person who paid for it. She can keep the talk. I'll keep building shelves. And sometimes on a Saturday morning, I'll stand at my kitchen window, the one with a view of the street we both grew up on, and I'll think about the distance between dreaming something and doing it. It's not a distance measured in intelligence or luck or advantage. It's measured in choices, small and accumulating, made over years in the direction of the thing you actually want. I made mine. The walls are painted. The floor is refinished. The apartment is home. That's the whole story. Broken heart, bitter victory. The apartment stays mine. The relationship is salvaged into something smaller and more honest than it was before. And sometimes that's what justice looks like, not a courtroom vindication, not a tearful apology, but your sister standing in a room you built and saying you did good in a voice that almost reaches the thing she still can't quite say. Maybe that's the only apology she's capable of. I can live with that. I can live with all of it, because I own the place where I'm living.